Hey everyone, it's Rick, and I wanted to thank you for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. I'm in the neighborhood again, little view on the side here of what's going on. It's clearly still winter, and just when you think it might actually be coming to an end, we have a forecast for another major storm coming our way this afternoon into tomorrow, which is expected to dump somewhere around 18 inches of snow on top of already accumulated 18 inches of snow. So I think we're still in for a winter treat. I wanted to continue our conversation from last time where, we spent a fair amount of time looking at examples of how separation, division, and all of the components that are related to that create conditions for conflict. And I think we're at a point now where hopefully we're all starting to see how pervasive and ubiquitous conflict is in what we do. And maybe there's an opportunity, or maybe it's time now to try to take a dive into why this happens, and what are the underlying root causes, or what's the nature of conflict and division that really sets us up for sort of endless cycles of discontent, contradiction, frustration, all the manifestations of conflict. So I want to give you another example from high school. You can really pick any conflict that you choose, and I would encourage you to, again, apply this to your own example as you're listening. And let's use that example to now try to take apart some of the pieces that underlie, the conflict that essentially shows up. So I'll take you to ninth grade, first year of high school, transition from junior high school. And I had history as one of my classes. And at the time, had a teacher who was pretty difficult, pretty tough by reputation. I don't think our class was particularly enamored with, her personality. She wasn't exactly a touchy-feely type. She was very, nuts and bolts, to the point. And we got an assignment for a local history project where we were supposed to pick, an architectural landmark, some kind of building, and to learn how to essentially go into libraries and, access archives and really try to get to the core of, the history of the building and put this report together. So it was a pretty big undertaking, and I set about doing that, followed the instructions, put the time in, and submitted the report like everybody else. And a few weeks later, the teacher went around the class and started handing back the papers, with the grades on them. And she handed me mine, and I actually did pretty well. I was happy. And her comment to me as she put my paper on my desk was, you're smarter than you look. And I was kind of taken aback by that. I didn't really know what that was supposed to mean, but clearly she had some kind of an impression, or I had given her some kind of an impression that made her think otherwise. And I was more amused by it than anything else, but it certainly was something that clearly stuck with me, where I was trying to figure out how exactly am I showing up here. And then the course went on, and things were fine. So what's the point of this? I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight is, what is the mechanism? It wasn't my conflict. I think it was, I'm using the teacher as an example of her conflict, in the sense of, expectations or first impressions not aligning with, whatever followed. And, it's a very common element, as we've seen, as far as how we take in our surroundings and immediately have overlay, some kind of, interpretation and some kind of, counterpoint or contradiction that we have to deal with one way or another, particularly when things don't align. So let's kind of look at that a little bit and say, all right, so what exactly might have happened there? The details are less important than, again, the mechanics. So clearly, when a new class starts, a teacher has a bunch of new faces in the class and doesn't know a whole lot about any of the students. And so there is sort of an immediate intake, sensory intake, if you will, of seeing students, listening to them, and other sensory inputs that really are our perception of, what's in our environment. And then immediately we start to apply thought, right? And so the first association is identification. You see somebody, the teacher sees me, she has to put a name to me, so I have my name clearly. So that's the first part of identification. And then, there are, I don't know, maybe other elements that she's looking at that I'm not aware of. I did a lot of sports, wasn't particularly concerned about how I dressed. And, immediately there's sort of a composite of interpretations or identifications that start to form the image of who I am, right? So there's an interpretation process going on. So there's perception, there's identification, and then there's interpretation of what am I seeing relative to my accumulated knowledge, my accumulated traditions, my accumulated expectations, all the things that we've talked about. And you start to create an image that you overlay on a person or anything that you actually perceive, right? And then based on that interpretation, you make some sort of a judgment as to, does this align? Here's what I think is going on. Does it align with what I think should be? And, if it aligns, then, you go in a particular direction and you say, okay, that's great. So I'll build on that. And if it doesn't, you get into a situation where you go, all right, this is not okay. This, I think this is what should be. And you start to imagine either the corrected action, or you start to imagine, how what you think is going to create problems. And, again, in her case, clearly there was something that was saying he's not too smart. And, again, not clear on what she thought should be, if you will, other than saying perhaps this is what's likely to happen on the assignment. I'll wait and see and validate, my interpretation with, what I think will happen. And then, of course, in this case, for whatever reason, I did not align with the expectations that she had. And lo and behold, that was in contradiction to her interpretation. And, what should have been actually maybe was better than it should have been from her perspective. And her comment to me then was, "You're smarter than you look." And, again, there's a whole cascade of the same process that, could happen on my side, which no doubt did. But we'll just use her as an example. And so you can kind of see how we have essentially this repetitive cycle of perception, identification, interpretation, imagination, and response. And at the center of it is our sort of accumulated knowledge, experiences, values, traditions, all the things that we've talked about that basically keep interfacing and keep building and revising based on this back and forth of thought that is just going between those steps. And then there's some kind of response that creates a next perception, and we keep cycling and we keep going through that. And so again, we have sort of this endless cycle, mechanical cycle really, which we'll look at more closely, that always at the center has, again, our accumulated knowledge, our self-image, the expectations and so forth. And we're not aware of it. And so it becomes essentially just backdrop to how we see our surroundings and how we interact. And, at the end of the day, as we've mentioned many times before, the question really becomes, are we really seeing what's actually going on, or are we shaping what we see based on what we know? And, what we know is always from the past. So we'll continue to dive into this, but you can start to see how even in oneself, again, using this example with the teacher, you can create your own inner conflict and surprises that you're constantly dealing with, unaware. And, the comment, depending on who receives a comment like you're smarter than you look, also will create a potential cascade in the recipient of that comment. And off we go, right? Now we have cycles meeting each other, images of each other meeting each other, and we're in this spin cycle of essentially having no bearing on what actually is going on. So think about that in your daily experiences. Watch yourself, how the minute you see something or hear something, you are going through that process of identification. What is it? How do I think about it? You interpret. You then say, does it align? And you have some kind of image that you create one way or another. You imagine, and then you respond. And we have this cycle that is constantly going back and forth. So see how that plays out and just watch it, because it's very interesting to see. So that's it for today. Next time we'll take a look at another example of, what I basically call is the thought box. Is what I just described is really a cycle that is puts us in a box. And we'll look at some other examples for you to, again, explore on your own. Don't take my word for it. It's really important for you all to look at this and to find out for yourself. So, one more view of the road. Wishing you all a great day, a fantastic week. For those of you who are in the snow belt, stay safe, stay warm, and happy shoveling tomorrow, snow blowing tomorrow when this all ends. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Take care.